Hi everyone, thank you for joining us today for this important topic. My name's Jessica Stewart. I'm the Executive Director of Family and Community Services Insights Analysis and Research area, also known as FACSIA in the Department of Communities and Justice. And welcome to this month's Lunch and Learn Research Seminar on making it easier for Aboriginal communities to access and use government data. This is a critical component of the work we're doing to deliver on the national Closing the Gap reforms on Indigenous data sovereignty and Indigenous data governance. So before we begin, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that wherever we're joining from, joining today's webinar from across New South Wales, we're all living and working on Aboriginal land that was never ceded. I'd like to personally acknowledge the Bidjigal people, who are the owners and First Nations people of the area where I'm joining from. And I'd also like to pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, past and present, and to future and emerging leaders. And I'd like to extend that respect to our Aboriginal colleagues joining us today. In particular, I'd like to acknowledge the outstanding leadership of Maelona Stephens and Ian Brown in the area of Indigenous data sovereignty and governance, who work here in DCJ and who are presenting today. They, along with Naramanala colleagues, in particular Winsome Matthews and Amy Opio, have in many ways led the way in how New South Wales government agencies can adopt the principles of Indigenous data sovereignty and governance and apply it in the government setting. And nowhere is this more important than in DCJ, given the significant impact we have in the lives of many Aboriginal families and communities. I'd also like to warmly welcome everyone joining us today, all of our webinar participants. We've had more than 600 people register from a broad range of organisations, universities and departments, which just shows the importance and interest in this topic. And we'll be discussing initiatives that support Aboriginal communities and stakeholders to access and use data about Aboriginal people, families and communities, which is held by DCJ. We'll also provide information about our publicly available data, as well as information on how to seek access to bespoke data to aid with community planning and decision making. So after the presentations, we'll have a short Q&A if time permits. Please make sure that you put any questions you may have for our speakers in the chat box during the presentation, and we can come to those at the end. So firstly, I'd like to introduce our presenters for this afternoon. Ian Brown is a proud Gomeroi man and Principal Implementation Officer working within the Closing the Gap Priority Reform 4 on data sharing with Aboriginal communities. And Maelona Stephens, who is a proud Yuin woman and Senior Implementation Officer working on the Priority Reform 4 work. Ian and Maelona are both part of DCJ's Naramanala program or Aboriginal Knowledge Program team, who lead on embedding the principles of Indigenous data sovereignty and governance in the work of DCJ. I'd also like to welcome Hendra Santoso, who is also presenting today and who is a Senior Analyst in the Child Protection Reporting Team in FACSIA. Hendra has worked in the areas of early intervention, partnerships and various roles in FACSIA for now more than a decade. Hendra is passionate about public service and has worked in the Commonwealth Government for 10 years before joining DCJ. So Hendra is going to provide an overview of a dashboard we created and made publicly available on data that is important and meaningful to Aboriginal communities in the area of child safety, child protection and out-of-home care. And finally, I'll introduce Peter Riley, who is the Director of Operational Performance in FACSIA and who leads the team who built the dashboard, who will be hosting the Q&A session at the end. So thank you all so much for coming today. I also just wanted to let everyone know that the session will be recorded and we'll post it on the FACSIA webpage after today. And if you've registered for today's webinar, you'll receive the link to the recording within 1 week, and you're more than welcome to share that amongst your colleagues. So thank you again for joining us today, and please go ahead, Ian and Maelona.
Hi all, and thank you, Jessica, for that wonderful introduction to the very important work that we're doing within the Department of Communities Justice, but also across the state of New South Wales more broadly. So essentially here today, I'll be speaking to the joint program of work that we're doing as a part of the New South Wales Closing the Gap Priority Reform 4 joint program. In particular, I'll be focusing on the New South Wales Data Connector Service and how we're working together in partnership with the New South Wales coalition of Aboriginal peak organisation to be able to deliver on reforms that better enable and reform the data ecosystem that makes it better accessible for Aboriginal communities throughout New South Wales. That will also enable decision making and, of course, future planning of the way in which we work within our own communities to create change. First and foremost, I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country, one that we do as a part of the reform on data team, but also Narramunla. But to start off, we'd like to acknowledge Aboriginal people as the First Nation people of New South Wales and pay our respects to elders both past and present. We recognise the youth as they are the leaders moving forward into the future. We acknowledge the ongoing connection that Aboriginal people have to the lands, waters and seascapes of New South Wales. And we also recognise Aboriginal people as the original custodians of this land. I would also like to acknowledge the country of which I'm joining to you today. I'm coming to you from the beautiful lands of the Wabikal people up here in beautiful Newcastle, but would also like to acknowledge my traditional homelands of the Gomeroi people, where I get my strength and my ongoing motivation to be able to deliver this such important work that we're doing. I'd like to give Maelona the opportunity to introduce herself as well, as she'll be will be tic-tacking throughout this presentation, speaking on a number of different slides.
Hi everyone, I'm Maelona Stephens, proud Yuin woman from the beautiful South Coast, born and raised and living and working here on country, and a data connector under the Priority Reform 4 work. And just while we're there, I'd also like to acknowledge country. I'm on the lands of the Wadi Wadi people, one of 13 clans of the Yuin Nation, and pay respects to our elders past, present. Thanks, Ian.
No worries. So into the content essentially. So an overview of what we'll be discussing today will be mainly focused around the work that we're doing in the Priority Reform 4 space. So the first kind of couple of slides will speak on the National Agreement on Closing the Gap with a focus on Priority Reform 4. We'll also touch on the New South Wales policy landscape, which is enabling the reforms to be delivered. A slide about Indigenous data sovereignty and Indigenous data governance and how we've advocated to be able to embed that in different policy and strategies across New South Wales Government. Would be stepping through the New South Wales Joint Program on Priority Reform 4, so what we're doing in partnership with the New South Wales Coalition of Aboriginal Peak Organisations. Then I'll jump into the New South Wales Data Connector Service, touching on case studies, in particular justice reinvestment, and then providing some overviews around service tracking and how we're going and delivering on the joint program of work that the New South Wales Government have obligations to. So the National Agreement on Closing the Gap, Priority Reform 4. This speaks to shared access to data and information at a regional levels, with the ambition to achieve outcomes that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have access to and the capability to use locally relevant data and information to set and monitor the implementation of efforts to close the gap. That's also reflective of communities' priorities and enables them to drive their own development. Within the Priority Reform 4, the target that we're working towards is the increased number of regional data projects to support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities to make decisions about closing the gap and their development. The National Agreement on Closing the Gap, Priority Reforms and their interconnectedness. So for us as a team working within the space of looking at the legislative reform, the priority reforms of number 4, it really speaks about shared access to location-specific data and information, which will support Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and organisations to support the achievement of the first 3 priority reforms. But within a New South Wales context, there's also an additional reform of which speaks to employment, business growth and economic prosperity, which is also so crucial that information is provided and given to First Nations communities here within a New South Wales context. As an overview of the priority reforms, Priority Reform 1 speaks to formal partnerships and shared decision making. Priority Reform 2 speaks to building the community controlled sector. Priority Reform 3 is all about transforming government organisations and how we better engage and do business with Aboriginal communities. And as I alluded to, the Priority Reform 5, that's New South Wales specific, is in regards to employment, business growth and economic prosperity. Within the National Agreement on Closing the Gap, Clause 70 speaks to the that all parties agree that disaggregated data and information is most useful to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organisation and communities to obtain a comprehensive picture of what is actually happening within their communities and to better enable them to make decisions about their futures. Priority Reform 4 arises from the 2019 engagement process to be able to develop the national agreement points. But what I wanted to really allude to from that engagement with Aboriginal communities is one particular quote that came from a participant from within New South Wales, is that to collect, analyse and use our own data to meet our own needs. It's important, it's our information. We should use it for our own purposes as decided by us. So really touching on the need and obligations of New South Wales Government to support and enable self-determination of Aboriginal communities. In New South Wales, though, we're going beyond the wordings that's identified within the National Agreement, and we're really looking to embed a process that's changing the way that we look at data and information that we collect about First Nations people, communities, and what's actually occurring within their local within the local context. In the National Agreement, Clause 17D speaks to that Aboriginal people, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have access to and capability to use. This is something that I've already alluded to, but in that we're looking to, we're speaking to the New South Wales have an obligation to support communities to build new skills or to build on existing capabilities to use locally relevant information, which supports monitoring efforts that work towards really closing that gap. This is also being reflective of communities' priorities, which enable self-determination of their own communities. To achieve this, the approaches taken must support data projects that improve on the collection, access, management and use of data for engaging in genuine collaborative partnerships with Aboriginal communities. So moving from a state where the New South Wales Government data ecosystem being focused on government needs, that's usually deficit frame, that is decontextualised, aggregated and hard to access for Aboriginal communities, and moving towards a state of it being centred on community priorities, it being reflective of the realities and life worlds that we hold as First Nations people, that is contextualised about our reality and what's actually going on and occurring within our communities, that the information that we're holding and collecting and sharing back to communities is disaggregated, but also available and accessible to First Nation communities. So making that data and information that we have an obligation to share back is really easy to digest and understandable from a First Nation perspective.
So as a part of the advocacy that Ian touched on, we were successful in 2021 as Narramunala in advocating for the concepts of Indigenous data sovereignty and governance to be incorporated in the New South Wales data strategy. So a commitment to Indigenous data sovereignty and governance is listed under the strengthening transparency and trust theme of the strategy, and became a large enabling factor for our unique context in New South Wales, where Priority Reform 4 goes beyond just shared access to data and also includes building a model of Indigenous data sovereignty and governance in New South Wales. So Indigenous data sovereignty and governance, when we're speaking about Indigenous data, it's information or knowledge in any format or medium which is about and may affect Indigenous peoples both collectively and individually. So it's data on our resources and environments, so land history, geographical information, water data, data about our people and communities, so demographic or social data, which might be about health, education, how we use services, and including community-held data. And then data from Aboriginal peoples and communities, so traditional cultural data, knowledge and community stories. Indigenous data sovereignty is the right of Indigenous people to exercise ownership through the creation, collection, access, analysis, interpretation, management, dissemination, and the reuse of Indigenous data. where Indigenous data governance is the right of Indigenous peoples to autonomously decide what, how and why our data are collected, accessed and used, to ensure that data about us reflects our priorities, values, worldviews and diversity. So in Australia, there's 5 principles of Indigenous data sovereignty that the Myamnari Wingara Aboriginal Data Sovereignty Collective have developed. And those are the right to exercise control of the data ecosystem across the data lifecycle, the right to contextual and disaggregated data that's available and accessible at all individual, community and First Nations levels, to data that is relevant and empowers sustainable self-determination and effective self-governance, to data structures that are accountable to Indigenous peoples and First Nations, and then that data that is protective and respects First Nations individual and collective rights. So this provides a high-level overview of some of the responsibilities of New South Wales CAPO and New South Wales Government under the under this joint program of work to transform New South Wales data ecosystems. So at a high level, we have a responsibility to develop a shared vision for Indigenous data sovereignty and governance, which CAPO are leading, the engagement with Aboriginal communities to define what Aboriginal data sovereignty means to communities in New South Wales. And then government are looking at the system constraints and then the possibilities for realising and being responsive to that community vision for Aboriginal data sovereignty and governance. There's also a responsibility to support community data ecosystems to mature. The CAPO are leading the work on administering a community data fund to develop the capability of the data capabilities of communities, and then review the practices around the use of community data and government's preparedness to be able to respond to that. And just noting that while it specifically calls out supporting community data systems to mature through this program of work and prior to, we also acknowledge that there's a lot of work in developing the data maturity and varying levels of data maturity across government systems as well. And then the work that New South Wales Government are leading is sharing data and making the end-to-end improvements to existing government data systems. So sharing data with communities in a timely and culturally appropriate way that meets both community needs and then government privacy and security standards through the Data Connector Service, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. And then identifying and mapping the enablers and barriers to the collection, management, access and use of government data to improve the quality and the relevance of the data that we hold and the way that governments tell stories using that data. So from those responsibilities, it will lead to drafting the reform blueprint and model, which will outline what's needed to put Aboriginal data sovereignty and governance into practice in New South Wales and improve how information is shared and used by both communities and governments. The Department of Education also have a parallel workstream under Priority Reform 4, and so they're scoping and developing data-related training and career pathways for Aboriginal students and communities. So moving from that a data ecosystem where today data about Aboriginal people is centred on government program needs, it's aggregated, decontextualised and hard to access, and the insights it produces are often partial and deficit-based, to a reformed data ecosystem that respects and upholds Aboriginal data sovereignty principles and implements Aboriginal data governance practices. To an ecosystem that facilitates streamlined data sharing, enables self-determination, dialogue and joint decision-making that's anchored in a more complete picture. So to summarise, the joint program of work, New South Wales CAPO and New South Wales Government were funded $18.76 million over 2 years to work in partnership on this system reform under the New South Wales Closing the Gap implementation plan. So as I touched on, New South Wales CAPO are engaging with Aboriginal communities to develop the shared understanding of what Aboriginal data sovereignty and governance should look like in New South Wales. New South Wales Government have implemented a Data Connector Service and will be conducting a systematic analysis to understand the data sharing enablers and barriers. CAPO are also administering a $3.1 million community data fund to build the capability and capacity of Aboriginal communities to use data and to establish their governance structures. So together, in partnership, CAPO and New South Wales Government will develop a reform package that transforms community and government data systems to implement Aboriginal data sovereignty and governance. And through a sound approach of developing a reform package, we then lay the foundations for reform into the future.
So as May just alluded to in her slides, as one of the obligations or one of the tasks that New South Wales Government have been, I guess, allocated or taken on is to actually establish the New South Wales Data Connector Service. In speaking about the New South Wales Data Connector Service, I'll just go back one slide, thanks May. In speaking about the New South Wales Data Connector Service, this is one part of the joint program of work between New South Wales Government and New South Wales CAPO. The service aims to provide Aboriginal people throughout New South Wales with information and data about their communities for purpose, including but not limited to informed decision making and future planning within a community context. The service itself is made up of data connectors that are both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal who work across several government agencies to better enable access to data and information. What we're already doing within the service right now is providing a single entry point to request government-held data. We're improving consistency of experience through better engagement and a networked service across government, and supporting community members and organisations to find the data and information they need. Where we're hoping to take the service or moving forward, where we're looking to where the service will be moving over the course of our program is toward the state that we develop insights and tools that could share information with communities in a more useful format. And this is what's so important about the presentation that our colleague Sandra will be undertaking later on in the presentation as well. But we also look into streamlining and aligning agency process and procedures to better enable more timely data release, but also a systematic analysis of data barriers and enablers identified in data request to inform system reform options moving forward. In relation to the role that agency data connectors play, we kind of work in three kind of spheres within this space. And the first sphere that I would like to bring your attention to is the work that we do within our clusters. So at a high level, what we're looking to achieve internally to our agency and the clusters that we work within is to make data more transparent, to be able to identify suitable data to meet requests from Aboriginal communities, but also to allow for that networking and consultation with various agencies, but also internal teams that may meet the needs of the request which the data requester, the community requesters are making when engaging with the service more broadly. One of the other spheres of which we're working on in terms of creating this linking role within the Data Connector Service is working with Aboriginal communities and organisations who are requesting data. So gathering information on the requests made, so focusing on the purpose, intent and use of requesting data, but also in that process refining the request with Aboriginal community requesters if we do not have a real sound understanding of what exactly they're asking. So an iterative process that we're engaged in and have a touch point that we as Data Connector act as brokerage between Aboriginal communities and the internal data teams that are SMEs in relation to finding relevant data that's needed. We also provide I guess, a space to be able to reflect on the process more broadly, to really engage with Aboriginal community data requesters around whether or not our process actually met their need and whether or not it was actually an easier or better experience moving forward. And this, of course, will inform the broader reform approach that we take as a New South Wales Government. In relation to the sphere where we work with other connectors and the TCO, but formerly DPC and the New South Wales CAPO team, it's about being able to translate the emerging understanding of Aboriginal data sovereignty and governance within a New South Wales context and be able to incorporate that where needed within our own respective agencies. We also, through this process, are developing case studies to better understand the progress and implementation of priority reform 4, but also networking ideas that address sharing of data barriers and potential unnecessary process that we have as government internally. So really, again, touching on that ease of access to data for Aboriginal communities. This slide here speaks to, I guess, the steps that we take as data connectors in responding to data requests. So when we engage with Aboriginal community data requesters, the first kind of step that we take is developing an understanding of the community's needs. So initial contact is usually made by email, where we coordinate an introductory meet and taken time to listen and understand the issues or concerns being raised by the community data requester. We undertake an initial assessment of the proposed data request and re-engage with the requester to formulate and refine the data request itself. The second step, or the second stage of the part of these steps, is to really understand the purpose of the request and proactively meet information needs. So we understand what the data and information will be used for and what the requester will do with it. Direct to potential data sources that we already have that are public facing. So that Aboriginal-led dashboard that Hendra will be stepping through later in the presentation, but also identifying variables that may meet the requester's needs, sharing of information about limitations and quality of available data that we hold as government, and suggest and share contacts to other data connectors in the government agency where relevant, so in relation to data requests that may require linkages across different agencies. So the third step that we take within the Data Connector program, as well as data connectors, is to be able to provide data information in a useful and relevant format. So moving into a space that we understand what format would be useful to the requester, that is accessible and easy to understand. We also check in with the requester to gauge whether the data has been beneficial and met the community's needs as it relates to the request made.
So just to provide a case study or example of a multi-agency, multi-location aggregate data request from New South Wales Just Reinvest. So New South Wales Just Reinvest supports Aboriginal communities to explore and establish justice reinvestment initiatives and advocates for systemic changes that ultimately build safer and stronger communities. And throughout 2023 to 24, Justice Reinvest have submitted data requests on behalf of 5 of the communities that they work with for both existing and proposed sites, including Burke, Moree, Mount Druitt, Nowra and Kempsey. And they're seeking to establish regular data sharing arrangements between themselves and agencies as the intermediary to Aboriginal communities. And data connectors are supporting Justice Reinvest through the coordination and troubleshooting across their agencies and assisting JR to formulate their data requests. So this diagram pictures the relationship between a number of different agencies with Justice Reinvest, and then there's back to the communities that they work with, and really shows the work of and value of the data connectors in being that single point of contact for Justice Reinvest while they undertake the internal coordination, which deals with a number of different and varied data sets across their agencies and data custodians that they have to engage with to get the data back into the hands of those communities that Justice Reinvest are currently working with. So this is a snapshot of our data request dashboard and pictures some of the statistics from the Data Connector Service thus far. So far we've had 73 data requests come through the Data Connector Service to date. 136 data sets have been requested through the service, and the data connectors have engaged with 222 data custodians on behalf of community members to date. The graph shows who has accessed the Data Connector Service and who's requesting data. So Aboriginal community controlled organisations account for over half of the data requests that have come through. Our second highest requester is Aboriginal researchers, and we also have some community members who have accessed the service as well. And then we've got the purpose for data requests listed there as well, but monitoring and evaluation, advocacy, accountability and allocations or developing business cases are among the top reasons for requesting data through the Data Connector Service. So while there are different types of community members and organisations requesting data for different purposes, all of those are supporting local decision making by getting data back to community to drive their own solutions. A little bit on the performance of the Data Connector Service from March 2024. So we've had 73 data requests. This is up by 23. The requests finalised since March this year, we've had 13. The median time taken to finalise requests is 7 days, so that's a positive change, reducing by 6 from prior to this. We also have an agency where there is a data connector who's specifically responsible for sharing data. So without them in those statistics, it's around 54 days. And the pending requests that are sitting at above 100 days to respond to is at 12, but has seen a positive change with a reduction of 1. So the new requests since March this year are mostly for allocating and business cases. They involve aggregate data. They ask for LGA level disaggregation, largely come from ACOs and Aboriginal researchers, and are already finalised while there are still some in progress.
So that brings us to the end of our part of the presentation for this Lunch and Learn. Our contact information is available in the chat, but also on the webinar page. But right now, I guess with no further ado, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Hendra to be able to step through the important work him and his team are doing in relation to the dashboard and developments of tools and products within DCJ. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. And thanks, Maelona. That's a wonderful presentation because I learned quite a lot about Indigenous data sovereignty, the data governance, and also the role of the data connector as well. So it's a very important part that you do within the DCJ. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is to present the Aboriginal-led data sharing, child protection and out-of-home care dashboard. So Peter Riley, who's my director, is here with me as well. So just in case there's any tricky questions that I can't answer, so he'll be around to actually answer those for me. Okay, so before I start my presentation, I also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. So for me, that is the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nations. Pay my respects to their elders past and present, and I extend that respect to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and colleagues here today. So this is a bit of a contents of what I'm going to go through today. So the first one, it will be the development timeline of this dashboard that I'm going to be presenting. The evolution of the dashboard, what are the measures that are presented in this dashboard, the next steps in terms of what we're going to do in the future, a bit of web demonstration, and questions at the end. So my esteemed colleagues is going to be monitoring the chat as well. So if you do have any questions during the presentation, do not hesitate to answer them, to ask them, and hopefully they can answer on my behalf, or we can actually put it towards the end. Okay. So I'll start off with the development timeline of this Aboriginal-led dashboard. So as you can see, it happened about 9 years ago in 2015, where the Guiding Principles Yarning Circle was created to partner with the Grandmothers Against Removal and create this shared advocacy model. And then in 2016, the membership required the creation of this dashboard to inform their advocacy. So I believe that 2017-18, the first version of the dashboard was sort of co-designed with Jumar and built. However, during this period of time till late 2021, the release wasn't approved by the current government at that time, and it's probably because of the contentious issues around the data. And following a fast forward from January 2022, there's more traction in terms of the soft release being completed. And it was circulated to some of the Aboriginal key stakeholders in a tabular format. However, it's not publicly available, but it is shared through sort of a SharePoint or something like that, which they can access the data. So the first version of the dashboard was publicly released in 2023. And then follow that on from between March to June 2023. There's an important work that actually has a collaboration with the Naramanala colleagues here of the co-design of version 2. So that involved like Amy Opio, Ian, as well as Vincent Matthews, and also other forums that actually get the feedback in terms of co-designing this dashboard. So we successfully publicly released this version 2 dashboard in August 23. So basically that's up to 21-22 data with a different design completely from their first version. So from August 23 to March 2024, so there was a further development of this dashboard where we provide the data up to 22-23 with some of the additional measures and also addressing some of the data gaps. And in April 2024 this year, we successfully published version 3. And moving on to this date, we continue to develop this dashboard to include 23-24 data, and planning to release the version 4 sometime next year. Okay, so we can see this. It's on your left. That's the first version of the dashboard. So basically, it is a one-page view that presented all these measures by DCJ District and Aboriginality, which was released back in February 2023. So they were grouped by the DCJ departmental framework across 4 themes. So the first one is population rates of children and young people in the New South Wales child protection system. Second is the keeping Aboriginal children and young people safe from harm. A third is the respectful partnerships with Aboriginal families and kin. And the fourth one is supporting the safety and well-being of Aboriginal children and young people while in care. And what we have here is version 2. As you can see, it's quite different from the first version. So it had similar information, but was redesigned to present the key measures from an Aboriginal perspective. So using the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander child placement principles from the Secretariat of the National Aboriginal and Islander Child Care. So all these indicators were actually grouped into 5 core elements. So as you can see, the prevention, partnership, placement, participation, and connection. So this is a framework designed, I think, by the Australian Institute of Health and Family and Welfare to promote policy and practice that will reduce the overrepresentation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children in the child protection system. Okay. So third version is very similar. So basically it has the 22-23 data currently on the website. And the FEXIA are committed to improving the current dashboard and consulting with key Aboriginal stakeholders to address reporting gaps. And as you can see from version 2, there was some a gap in the partnership page where we don't have the data for, but in version 3, we have addressed those gaps by adding information about funding to the Aboriginal community control organizations. Okay, so what are the measures? So the first version here, we can see some of the child protection and out-of-home care related measures. So there are one of the key sort of performance indicators that we have. So the first one is population rates for the children and young people at ROSH, suspected at ROSH, entering out of home care and children seen. So top 3 primary reported issues by the helpline, proportion of children at ROSH and children seen, and a couple of key measures from the out of home care, as you can see here, which include a very important element, which is the proportion or the number of children that were placed with the relative or Aboriginal caregiver. Second version, we have everything that's in the first version, plus we include the population rates for the children in care as well, because I think that's quite an important element or indicator that we hold. We also provide children on guardianship order. Children who exited out of home care to restoration guardianship order, as well as a proportion of them in comparison to the children in care on the 30th of June the previous year, and the number and percentage of children and young people with documented case plan, cultural support plan, and living care plan. So third version, so what we have in the second version, plus the funding commitments to ECHOs, which I mentioned earlier, the children out of home care by length of time, and the case plan compliance by case management responsibility. So you do have who's actually being case managed by DCJ or ECHO and non-ECHOs. And also a measure of permanency stability. So what that is children and young people who were restored and did not return to out-of-home care within 12 months. Okay, so next steps. So what we intend to do is also present this in the different landscape by using the Aboriginal boundaries to complement the DCJ district boundaries. So there is a plan to meet representatives from Aboriginal Land Council this year, which Ian is going to organise to discuss these requirements. And then at the meantime as well, we will review existing measures to address more further data gaps if we can, identify new measures and retire measures that are no longer appropriate. Okay, so how to access this information? It's quite simple. So if you can go to www.facts.newsouthwales.gov.au, which is our website here. So on the right hand panel, you have a resource center. So once you click on that, you will have a tile that calls statistics. And further down on, there's a tile that has the Aboriginal dashboard there. So I'm going to stop sharing and go directly to the website. Just give me one moment. Fantastic. So once you click on that website, the link, it will give you to this page, which is on the DCJ website. So what it is, to give you a brief introduction of what it is. There is the 5 core elements which I mentioned. If you click on the twisties here, it will give you the measures that's reported for each core element. So at the bottom here, there is a link to the dashboard itself, but I would just want to point out that there is a metadata link too as well. So if you are an analyst like me who likes data and accounting rules and things like that, you can definitely access this link and get to know all the measures that actually being developed for this dashboard. Okay. So once you click on this link, then it will give you directly to this dashboard. So what's a good thing about version 3 as well? We've included this link to all the Aboriginal related data published by the DCJ. So if you click on that link, it will give you to this the second sort of tab that I've shown in my slide. So it gives you information about the statistical report, housing, quarterly statistical services for children and young people, and they will have some Aboriginal breakdown for that as well. Okay, so and then there is a statement on the accuracy of the Indigenous status data, on the Indigenous data sovereignty here as well. So so if I click on this link, so everything is interactive, right? So if you can hover around all the core elements there, you can go into the dashboard straight away. So if I click on prevention, then it will give me this page. So what we are trying to do is to sort of align all these measures that may be categorized in such a way that's more relevant to each of the core elements. So for example, in prevention, we think about children who were reported at Roche, who were seeing those issues and things like that. And also some of the population rates in the child protection system, which is down here. So this one here, it can go up to 8 primary helpline access issues. You can see that in the first version, you have only 3. So this will give you a little bit more flexibility in terms of choosing how many primary helpline related issues that you want to present. Over here on the left, you have the year, Aboriginality and district. So if you, it's a bit slow. So if you actually click on this year, okay, it's a bit of technical issues. Okay. Sorry, just give me one moment. I think I'm having some difficulty in getting this right.
Enter staged care.
It may be, Andrew, all the people logging on to look at the dashboard at the same time as you.
Yeah, possibly. Just let me grab. Sorry. I will actually do another way. I will open up the actual dashboard itself and just go from there. Sorry about that. Okay. All right, luckily I have got a backup. Okay, so as I was saying, you can actually look at or choose the year or relevant year that you want. So basically in this view is actually the headline numbers for that relevant year. So if I'm interested in 2021, I can click on this and everything will change accordingly to what you selected. If I want to interested in Aboriginal children only, everything here will change to Aboriginal children. If I'm interested in Mid-North Coast, I can just choose the Mid-North Coast here and everything will change accordingly. So what a good thing about this is that on the top right corner for each of these dashboard, you can access the trend data. Right, so if I click on this, so what it will give you is a bit of a time series of what we hold, the data that we hold till now. So the most recent, historical data is 2014-15 and all the way to 2022-23. And all of this is actually reported in the previous headline data that we have. And if you hover these charts, there will have some tooltips to actually assist you in better understand the measures and what they are. And the population rates also will give you a comparison between your selected district with New South Wales as a comparison if you do actually want to compare like to like. Okay. And over here, you can actually choose whatever assess issues that you want. So if I click on this, it will go back to the original page. You can go and click on this one here and go to the home page, or you can click on the arrows between left and right to move between each one. So I'm just gonna go to another, just briefly go to a few of these, if I may. Sorry. So partnership. So this one here, I think we covered that. It's actually not in version 2, but we've addressed this gap. So we do have the funding commitments for the past 3 years for ECHO and non-ECHO providers. So up to 2023, that's the funding commitment for next year. This is a little bit of heat map in terms of where the fundings are in terms of where in the cluster district. And if you go for New South Wales, all the charts will change accordingly. And if you go into here, a bit of time series about the 3 years of data and different programs that we have, which is permanency support program, the family preservation program, and a TI program. But it does really have a good way of knowing, and it's a bit of transparency in terms of how much funding was allocated to ECHO, etc. Okay, so I won't go through all the other details of the dashboard, but I just want to maybe just go to the last one, which is connection. So down here, it's one of the measures that we have on children out of home care and exiting to guardianship and restoration. And so there is a placement principle in terms of the proportion of children, Aboriginal children who were actually placed with Aboriginal real kin, Aboriginal caregiver as at 30th of June. So the most sort of recent addition that we added in 2023 is the placement stability. So if you look at the click on 2022, so we can see that out of the 157 children who was age 0 to 16 who were actually restored to their parents and did not return to out-of-home care. So the higher the better, basically. And then you can actually look at the different districts as a comparison as well. And similarly, you can look at the top right-hand corner and you give you a bit of a time series breakdown for that particular district's Aboriginality and so on and so forth. Okay, so last but not least, we do have a sort of a glossary page in terms of explaining what the dashboard holds and some of the caveats and things like that. And there are also some useful links on the left-hand side for you to access as well. Okay, so I think I will wrap it up and I'll forward to Peter Riley, who is a Director of Organizational Performance, to answer any questions on the floor. Thank you. You're on mute, Peter.
Thank you, Hendra, and thank you, Ian and May, for a very clear and informative presentation. I think the slides were all very well laid out, and I think the pack will be a very useful tool to make available, and they'll be made available to all people who registered for the presentation today. We've had a few questions come through. One question that came through was around the data going, how many years of data is in the dashboard, and it does go back to 2014-15. There was also a question about, to you, May and Ian, about an example of data which is aggregated below LGA level. So the question is around, for example, have you given the data out by school or individuals? And if yes, could you share details of that?
I'm going to be very frank, in response to that, I guess, is that when we're talking about disaggregated low-level data, especially at an LGA level, it is quite difficult in regards to the legislative frameworks that we're operating under. So privacy is very much a big kind of barrier that we're looking to overcome as a part of the legislative reform approach that we're taking to PR4, and really scoping out where are the enablers and barriers to be able to get around that. To date, there are some, I guess, exceptions when we're talking about what types of requests that are being made. So whether or not it's a partnership between Aboriginal communities and potential researcher, the levels of security that's required to access that low level unit record level data, especially once we get below the cell size or the counting rules that's applied to allow for us to not, or individuals within communities to not be re-identified as they engage as a part of service delivery with government. So it is a big barrier that we are facing. To date, in regards to DCJ, we have not. provided, I guess, low-level data for that. In regards to the other areas, we are scoping, again, how we best tackle that and approach this. And I think, you know, partnered with that, as well as the concerns around confidentiality, is the risk-adverse nature that government agencies do take, especially when, you know, we look at the potential of re-identification and what implications that has on government. So how we go about tackling that is definitely a task for us data connectors and our New South Wales CAPO colleagues as well, in terms of understanding the need and what's going to be most beneficial to Aboriginal communities. And then it's our job internally of government agency to really advocate for the revolutionary change that we need to reform the data ecosystem.
Thanks, Ian. Can I add to that to say that for public presentation of data, we normally don't go below LGA, but on a case-by-case basis, we have provided data to smaller sub-geographies, but it's under the provision that that data is not shared, is used for a particular purpose, and held securely, and so on. So there are ways to get hold of data, but it's critical, as Ian said, to make sure that we protect privacy and confidentiality of individuals. And so there's always going to be a tension there between what we can display publicly versus what, and in this dashboard that Hendra showed you, if cell sizes are very small, the data will be suppressed. If you put combinations of data together, it'll be suppressed. I've only got a few minutes left. I've got two more questions I want to just cover. One question asked about how do we confirm Aboriginality of people on a dashboard. That is an issue which has been an issue of contention, and so more recently the department has introduced a new way of recording Aboriginal status when children and young people first get reported to Child Protection Services. They're not necessarily reporting that child as recording a child as Aboriginal, but if there's information that's indicative of that status, it's being reported as, and we're subject to confirmation and further information being collected by caseworkers to confirm that. And that's important because we have a concern around children being de-identified, and that's different from misidentified. And if a child's been reported as Aboriginal and that information subsequently collected demonstrates that they're not Aboriginal, then we're saying that's a misidentification. If a child's reported as Aboriginal, we confirm its Aboriginality and then we change that definition, then that's de-identification. That's a big concern for people that have why children de-identified. So we can provide you more information about that, but that's a quick summary of that question. And then the final question that's asked about is the availability of the data behind the dashboard. You can request data behind the dashboard if you put a request in, and I think the organisers will send out a link for you can send your questions to and further questions. And finally, I just want to ask Ian and May and Hendra, if you've got one thing you want people to remember, what would it be about the presentation? You've got 30 seconds each.
All right, I guess I'll jump in first. I guess if there's one thing that I would like for all to take away from this presentation is that access to information is not only crucial to government service delivery, but creating real, genuine, long-lasting change. Information is the foundation for self-determination, and it's our obligation to uphold the rights of First Nations communities as articulated within the principles of Indigenous data sovereignty.
Thank you. Hendra?
Oh, I thought it was be last. So key takeaway.
I think May's answer. I think Ian's answering on behalf of May.
Okay.
I assume that was the case. Sorry, May.
Okay.
If you want to add something. No.
So my key takeaway, I think I say statistics are powerful. So there are wealth of information on the DCJ website, and it's all accessible in an interactive and fun way.
I noticed one more question came through while we were talking, and it's a question rather than a comment rather than a question, but it's around for us to record. If we start recording information around data by Aboriginal boundaries, being able to report children in placements by country and so on would be another measure that we would look at going in the future, looking at the future. But as I said, I want to thank everyone for their time. Thank again to presenters for their fantastic job in keeping on time and giving a very clear presentations. And I would like to also mention that the next webinar we have will be on July the 30th, and the topic will be supporting children involved with child protection services and youth justice services. So I look forward to you joining us again on that presentation. Thank you everyone for turning up.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks.
Yalu.